For millennia, the Drathuan Dominion had ruled the stars with an iron grip. Their empire stretched across thousands of star systems, built upon the bones of those who dared resist. With their energy-based warships, impenetrable defensive grids, and sheer numerical superiority, they had never once lost a major conflict. To the Drathuan, war was not a test of strategy or adaptability. It was a process, a machine of conquest that crushed opposition with cold, calculated efficiency. Across the galaxy, the mere sight of a Drathuan war banner heralded extinction. Their arrival meant the death of autonomy, the enslavement of civilizations, and the systematic rewriting of history to erase any trace of what had come before. They were unstoppable, absolute, unchallenged. So when their scouts first encountered humanity, the Drathuan hardly took notice. At first glance, humans seemed like nothing more than another minor species in the grand design of the Dominion's expansion. Their homeworld, Earth, was an unremarkable blue marble, orbiting a middle-aged star in a backwater arm of the Milky Way. They had no vast empire, no centuries-old lineage of conquest, and no fleets that could challenge the might of the Dominion. Their technology was, by all measurable standards, primitive, lacking the energy-based weaponry, advanced shielding, and hyperspace mastery that defined the galaxy's dominant races. Yet, over time, disturbing reports began to surface. Despite their perceived technological inferiority, humans were expanding at an alarming rate. Unlike other species, who took centuries to establish stable interstellar colonies, humanity seemed to spread like a wildfire, claiming planets in contested zones, securing asteroid fields rich with resources, and developing infrastructure at a pace that defied conventional wisdom. More concerning, human ships, despite their lack of traditional energy weapons, had begun engaging and defeating smaller Drathuan patrols. The Drathuan, who had perfected energy-based combat over thousands of years, dismissed kinetic weaponry as obsolete. Their fleets were designed to absorb plasma cannons, fusion lances, and ion bursts, all of which expended vast amounts of energy to overcome equally powerful energy-based shields. But human ships didn't use energy-based weaponry. Instead, they relied on hypervelocity projectiles, launching metal slugs at near-relativistic speeds, punching through hull plating like paper. Drathuan ships, designed to counter energy attacks, were left vulnerable to brute force impacts that their shields simply weren't built to withstand. At first, these incidents were dismissed as flukes, the result of inexperienced captains underestimating their foes, but the losses kept mounting. For the first time in centuries, the High Council of the Drathuan Dominion convened in urgency. The call to war, within the towering spires of Velkaris Prime, the heart of the Drathuan Dominion, the supreme warlord Kelrath Zun addressed the gathered warlords. His scaled features gleamed under the burning crimson glow of the war chamber, his piercing golden eyes scanning the assembly with the weight of absolute confidence. "The humans are an inconvenience," he said, voice smooth yet filled with barely veiled disdain. "A pest that has confused its minor successes with strength. It is time we remind them where they stand in the order of the cosmos." Some warlords chuckled at the thought. To them, the notion that humans had intentionally provoked the Dominion was laughable. It was more likely that these creatures, in their naive hubris, had merely wandered into battles they could not comprehend. Kelrath's claws tapped rhythmically against the polished obsidian war table, activating a holographic display of the Orion Expanse, a vast sector on the Dominion's outer frontier where human forces had been pushing further into disputed space. His gaze darkened. "We have underestimated them long enough." A flick of his claw, and the display changed, showing thousands of warships, each a behemoth of destruction, massing near the borders of human-occupied space. The largest invasion fleet in over a century was being assembled. 2,000 warships, millions of troops, siege platforms, planetary bombardment stations, dreadnoughts capable of reducing worlds to ash in hours. This would not be a simple conquest. It would be an eradication. Their technology is inferior. Their tactics are barbaric. Their resistance is meaningless, Kelrath continued, his tone final. This war will serve as a lesson, not just to them, but to the entire galaxy. The Drathuan do not tolerate defiance. The warlords roared their approval. The sound reverberating through the chamber like a battle cry from the depths of history itself. Humanity's secret weapon, deep within Sol Defense Command, beneath the reinforced lunar surface of Earth's hidden military stronghold, Fleet Admiral Elias Cade watched the holo displays with calm intensity. His war room was silent, save for the occasional murmurs of analysts reviewing fleet movements, running simulations, and preparing for what they all knew was coming. The Drathuan weren't just sending an attack force. They were sending an extermination fleet. Most species, upon facing such an overwhelming force, would have fled, surrendered, or at the very least attempted diplomatic negotiations. But humanity had learned from history, both its own and that of the countless species the Drathuan had conquered. Negotiation meant nothing to an empire that only respected strength. Cade leaned forward, eyes locked onto the tactical map. "We knew this day was coming," he said, "and we've been preparing for it." Unlike the Drathuan, who had perfected energy warfare over centuries, humanity had taken an entirely different path. While the Dominion's fleets were massive, their centralized command structures made them vulnerable to electronic warfare. Their ships relied on AI-coordinated battle networks, making them efficient but predictable. And that was their greatest weakness. Kinetic weaponry. Instead of energy weapons, human warships were equipped with mass drivers, capable of launching projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. No shields could withstand pure kinetic devastation. Cyber warfare AI. Humans had developed specialized AI viruses, designed to cripple enemy fleet coordination, disrupting everything from navigation to weapons targeting. Stealth and speed. While Drathuan warships were lumbering giants, human vessels were built for maneuverability and stealth, able to strike and disappear before the enemy could react. Orbital defense satellites. Automated railgun platforms had been placed in orbit around key human colonies, capable of firing thousands of hypervelocity rounds per second, effectively creating impenetrable kill zones. The Dominion expected a war of attrition, but humanity was about to give them something else entirely. Cade turned to his officers, his expression unreadable. "Deploy Phase 1 defenses," he ordered. "Let's see how the so-called invincible Drathuan handle their first real fight." As the massive alien armada emerged from hyperspace, brimming with overwhelming power and centuries of arrogance, they had no idea what awaited them. The greatest battle in human history was about to begin. The moment the Drathuan invasion fleet tore out of hyperspace, the fabric of reality itself seemed to shudder. Space rippled in a violent cascade of light as thousands of warships emerged into the void, their colossal metallic hulls blotting out the stars. The invasion armada was a breathtaking spectacle of raw military might. Battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, siege platforms, and planetary incinerators arranged in a perfect formation. An unstoppable tide of destruction gliding toward human-controlled space. For countless millennia, such an armada had heralded the end for civilizations. Planets had burned. Races had been wiped from history. Resistance had always been futile. The Drathuan did not conquer. They eradicated. Yet, as they entered human-controlled territory, something felt off. No human ships rose to meet them. No planetary defenses fired desperate salvos. The Drathuan fleet sailed forward unopposed, their shields shimmering as they absorbed the natural radiation of the local star. Silence stretched across the void, an eerie and unsettling absence of resistance. On the command bridge of the Dominion dreadnought Tyrannus, Supreme Warlord Kelrath Zune stood at the central tactical station, his golden eyes narrowed. The vast war table before him displayed the layout of the system: 6 planets, multiple asteroid belts, and a series of human-built space stations orbiting a massive gas giant. The absence of human resistance troubled him. "Their arrogance is amusing," muttered Admiral Vescaris, one of the more seasoned commanders. His scaled fingers tapped lazily against the hilt of his ceremonial plasma dagger. "They must believe surrender will spare them. Typical lesser beings." Kelrath remained silent, studying the battle map. He had seen too many conflicts to believe in coincidence. Something was wrong. A sharp chime from the intelligence console interrupted his thoughts. "Warlord," an officer reported, voice tinged with uncertainty. "We are detecting faint signals. Motionless objects scattered throughout the system." He hesitated before adding, They appear to be debris fields, but they are arranged in deliberate patterns. Kelrath frowned. Patterns? Yes, Supreme Warlord. They are positioned near every major orbital lane, near the Lagrange points of each planet, and in the asteroid belts. It is almost as if a sudden pulse of energy surged through the system. The sensor arrays flickered, momentarily distorting the tactical display. Then, without warning, the scattered debris fields came to life. What the Drathuan had dismissed as floating wreckage were, in reality, stealth platforms, kinetic launchers, and autonomous orbital defense grids. And they had just activated. Heartbeat later, hell was unleashed. A thunderous barrage erupted from every hidden satellite, every concealed railgun turret, and every deep space weapons platform camouflaged within the asteroid belts. Millions of projectiles tore through space at near-light speed, their velocity turning them into unstoppable lances of raw kinetic destruction. Unlike traditional energy weapons, which could be absorbed or diffused by shielding technology, these projectiles ignored conventional defenses entirely. They did not burn through, they punched through. The first wave of Drathuan warships never stood a chance. The kinetic rounds slammed into the leading battleships, piercing their hulls and ripping through entire decks as if they were made of paper. The sheer force of impact caused catastrophic decompression, tearing apart corridors, rupturing fuel cells, and detonating entire ammunition reserves in massive, blinding explosions. Within seconds, over 80 warships were annihilated. The survivors scrambled to activate countermeasures, but the onslaught continued. Each hidden platform was fully autonomous, equipped with self-correcting targeting AI, adjusting fire trajectories in real time. The Drathuan fleet was caught in a kill zone, trapped in a storm of hypervelocity slugs, each impact leaving gaping, mangled craters in their once impervious hulls. Kelrath Zun's claws dug into the edge of the command table, his golden eyes flicking between the flashing red casualty reports. "What in the void is this?" Vescaris choked out, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. Kelrath's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what this was. Humanity had lured them in. They had studied Drathuan tactics, their vulnerabilities, their reliance on energy-based defenses, and they had exploited them mercilessly. These defensive platforms weren't firing at random. They were prioritizing targets with surgical precision, systematically dismantling the invasion fleet's command structure. Kelrath snarled. "Break. Formation. Spread out and return fire," he barked, his command reverberating across the bridge. The Drathuan warships began maneuvering desperately, activating their plasma cannons, fusion lances, and ion burst arrays, sending waves of burning energy back toward the enemy installations. The void was illuminated by the brilliant, blinding streaks of weapons fire, but to their horror, nothing hit. Humanity had incorporated another crucial advantage into their defenses. Every automated platform was equipped with advanced evasion algorithms, using microscopic thrusters to shift their position by meters every few seconds, making them nearly impossible to track with traditional targeting systems. Kelrath could barely believe what he was witnessing. For the first time in centuries, the Drathuan were on the defensive. Deep within Sol Defense Command, Fleet Admiral Elias Cade watched the battle unfold from the safety of a reinforced command bunker. Unlike the chaos within the Dominion fleet, his war room was eerily calm. Analysts worked in perfect synchronization, adjusting firing solutions, monitoring enemy responses, and feeding new battlefield data into the AI systems controlling the orbital defenses. "We're tracking severe losses on their end," one officer reported. "They're attempting to scatter their formations to minimize casualties." Cade leaned forward, studying the strategic display. "Good," he said. "They think this is the main defense. Let them believe it." A subtle smirk crossed his face. This wasn't even humanity's real counteroffensive. The moment the Drathuans spread their forces out to avoid concentrated fire, they had unwittingly walked into the second phase of the trap. Cade straightened, giving the next command. "Deploy the Black Lances. Let's show them what real war looks like." From the far side of the system, hidden within the shadow of the largest gas giant, a fleet of human warships powered up their drives. These were no ordinary vessels. They were stealth cruisers, their hull plating designed to absorb and scatter sensor readings, rendering them invisible to conventional detection systems. Each ship was outfitted with tactical railguns, precision missile pods, and advanced electronic warfare suites capable of shutting down enemy targeting systems before a single shot was fired. The Drathan were still struggling to adapt to the orbital defenses when the Black Lances struck. In a coordinated attack, the hidden human fleet decloaked, launching devastating volleys of hypervelocity fire from multiple angles at once. The Drathan, Armada, once so confident in its superiority, was now being torn apart piece by piece. Kelrath Zun could only watch in stunned silence as another capital ship exploded in a violent inferno, sending molten debris scattering across the battlefield. He finally understood. Humanity hadn't stumbled into war. They hadn't been lucky in their victories. They had planned this, and they were winning. Kelrath Zun had led countless invasions across the stars, but never had he seen an engagement unravel with such brutal efficiency. Every second, another Drathun warship was shattered, their once mighty fleet reduced to a chaotic storm of wreckage and dying embers. His mind raced, calculating possibilities. The orbital defenses had been a brilliantly executed ambush, but the arrival of the human stealth fleet proved something far more unsettling. This battle had never been about a simple defense. Humanity had turned the invasion into a hunting ground. His claws tightened against the edge of the war table. The display flickered with damage reports, casualty lists, and erratic battlefield telemetry. It was worse than he had expected. The Black Lances were moving through the fray like predators among prey, striking from angles the Dominion fleet hadn't even considered possible. A group of 5 human warships had just emerged from a dust cloud formed by the wreckage of a fallen Drathuan dreadnought. The moment they appeared, their railguns roared to life, sending a synchronized volley of projectiles straight into the exposed flank of a Dominion battlecruiser. The impact was catastrophic. Chunks of the ship's armor peeled away, entire decks caved inward, and within seconds, the vessel's core detonated in a brilliant explosion that sent fire and debris hurtling into the void. Kelrath's second-in-command, Admiral Vescaris, turned toward him with wide, panicked eyes. "We need to fall back." His voice, once dripping with arrogance, now trembled with something dangerously close to fear. "Their stealth technology is disrupting all of our countermeasures. We cannot target them effectively." Kelrath barely acknowledged him. His mind was still processing the sheer lethality of the human warships. This wasn't just stealth. The Black Lances had perfected a new kind of warfare. Their cloaking fields were unlike anything the Dominion had encountered. Traditional stealth relied on sensor masking, energy dampening, or signal distortion. But the Lances used adaptive refractive plating, a technology that didn't just make them invisible. It actively bent light and radiation away from their hulls, making them almost undetectable even at close range. Worse, their targeting algorithms seemed to predict Drathun maneuvers before they even happened. Kelrath turned toward his weapons officer. "Have we decrypted their fire control signatures?" The officer's mandibles twitched in frustration. "Negative, Supreme Warlord. Their weapons seem to be using an unusual targeting methodology. It does not rely on heat signatures, emissions, or direct sensor locks. They are computing firing solutions before they even acquire us as targets." Kelrath's eyes darkened. Probability warfare. Humanity had developed weapons that fired not based on where a target was, but where it was mathematically most likely to be. Every shot accounted for speed, trajectory, gravitational forces, and even enemy decision-making. Patterns. That's why the Black Lances never missed. A sick realization coiled in his gut. If this was the true extent of humanity's war doctrine, then every assumption the Dominion had made about human military capability was catastrophically wrong. His fleet had never stood a chance. Kelrath's thoughts were abruptly shattered as an alarm blared across the command deck. A new set of alerts flooded the war table. Something was happening on the periphery of the battlefield. He turned sharply toward the sensor officer. "Report!" The Drathuan officer struggled to find words. "Massive gravitational distortions. Detected on the battlefield's edge. Some kind of emission surge. It's—" He stopped. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he finished. "It's a human capital ship." Kelrath stiffened. "A single warship is causing this disruption." The sensor officer swallowed. "It's not just any warship, Supreme Warlord." He paused, staring at his screen as if disbelieving the data. "The Vanguard-class dreadnought Nemesis has just entered the system." A cold silence gripped the bridge. Every Drathian in the room knew that name. The Nemesis was no ordinary dreadnought. It was a legend, spoken of only in hushed whispers among Dominion strategists. A warship so advanced, so devastatingly powerful, that its existence alone had been enough to force entire empires into surrender. It was said to house experimental weaponry, the kind that rewrote the rules of warfare. And now, it had arrived. Kelrath turned back to the tactical display just in time to see the massive black silhouette of the Nemesis emerge from hyperspace. It moved with the grace of a predator, its obsidian hull reflecting nothing, absorbing all light that touched it. Then, a new set of warnings began flashing across the Dominion war table. Nemesis had begun charging its primary weapon. Kelrath barely managed to whisper, "Get us out of here." But it was already too late. A dreadful silence fell across the Dominion fleet as the Nemesis announced its presence. It was not with words or warnings, but with the deep, oppressive gravity distortions that rippled outward like invisible waves of doom. Kelrath Zune had faced extinction before, had waged campaigns against species that clawed and fought for their survival. He had broken worlds, burned entire planetary networks, and watched as the weak were crushed beneath the Dominion's might. But never, not once, had he seen a single warship bend the laws of physics to its will. The Nemesis loomed at the battlefield's edge like a black monolith, its sheer size dwarfing even the Dominion's largest dreadnoughts. It bore no visible weapon ports, no glaring superstructures, just an unbroken obsidian surface that devoured light. Yet every sensor aboard Kelrath's command ship screamed warnings. Gravitational distortions increasing, the sensor officer stammered. It's not standard mass displacement. The ship is warping local spacetime." Kelrath's claws dug into the war table's surface as he processed what that meant. The humans had weaponized gravity itself. A new alert flashed across the battle map. The Nemesis was charging its primary weapon, but there were no heat spikes, no energy surges, no traditional telltale signs of a superweapon preparing to fire. Instead, the very fabric of space around it seemed to darken, stars bending at the edges of its presence. Then, the first shot was fired. There was no flash, no streaking beam of plasma, no ballistic trajectory. The Nemesis simply unleashed something, and the nearest Dominion battleship ceased to exist. Kelrath barely had time to register what had happened before a second warship followed suit. One moment, they were there, formidable constructs of armor, shielding, and firepower. The next, they were silent voids, their mass simply gone, as if reality had rewritten itself. A cold dread spread through the Dominion command deck. What kind of weapon could do that? Vescaris, his second in command, had turned paler than Kelrath had ever seen. "We need to—" A third battleship vanished. It was then that Kelrath understood. This wasn't a conventional weapon. It wasn't plasma, kinetics, antimatter, or anything that could be countered with shields or armor. The Nemesis was firing localized space-time ruptures, erasing targets before the universe could acknowledge they had existed. There was no detonation, no debris, just silence, a void left in its wake. Panic rippled through the Dominion fleet. Formations fractured as captains abandoned tactical doctrine and desperately maneuvered to escape. They had no defense, no counter-strategy, only fear. Kelrath refused to let chaos take hold. "Full retreat," he growled, slamming a fist against the war table. "Signal the remaining dreadnoughts to—" Another alert flashed. Not from the Nemesis, from the Black Lances. Humanity's stealth fleet had been waiting for this moment. As the Dominion forces scrambled to escape, the Black Lances sprang into action, moving through the battlefield with surgical precision. Kelrath's eyes widened as he saw what was happening. The humans weren't just annihilating them, they were forcing the Dominion into kill zones. Every attempted retreat was met with precision railgun volleys. Every fleeing ship found itself cornered by strike squadrons emerging from the debris field. The battlefield, once an arena of overwhelming Dominion supremacy, had become a labyrinth of human warfare. The Nemesis fired again. Another capital ship vanished, leaving nothing but an empty void where 3,000 Dominion warriors had once existed. Kelrath's heart pounded. This was not war. This was extinction. He turned sharply to Vescaris. "Hyperdrive status." The Admiral struggled to respond. "Primary jump drives disabled by the gravitational anomalies. Backup systems need at least. Kelrath didn't let him finish. Seconds mattered. The warlord reached for the emergency command module on his throne, inputting a fleet-wide override. Send the order to all surviving ships. Emergency blind jumps. Do it now. Vescaris hesitated. But the risk? Now. A tense pause. Then, across the war map, Dominion vessels began vanishing into hyperspace, their captains choosing the unknown dangers of blind jumps over the certainty of total annihilation. Kelrath watched as the last few ships, including his own dreadnought, prepared for the same maneuver. But before they could jump, a final transmission cut through all channels. It was human, a single voice, smooth, cold, unshaken. Run while you can. Then, just as the Nemesis turned toward them, his ship jumped to the unknown. Kelrath. Zune had seen war in its many forms. He had commanded fleets that broke entire civilizations, reduced planets to glass, and silenced the desperate pleas of species that thought they could resist the Dominion's might. But as he sat in the war chamber of his heavily damaged dreadnought, staring at the scattered remnants of what was once an invincible armada, he knew that for the first time in his life, he had been defeated. The atmosphere on the bridge was suffocating. The surviving officers moved with numb precision, their minds still reeling from the slaughter they had just escaped. More than 60% of the Dominion fleet was gone. Not destroyed in battle, erased. No wreckage, no debris fields, no survivors clinging to escape pods. Just a void where thousands of warriors had once been. Vescaris stood at the edge of the command console, his trembling hands pressed against the display. Hyperdrive diagnostics are coming in. Some ships emerged intact, others, he swallowed hard, others never reappeared. Kelrath already suspected as much. Blind jumps were a desperate gamble, and some had clearly miscalculated, warping into gravitational wells, star coronas, or empty regions of space where their fuel reserves would eventually run dry. But even that loss paled in comparison to what they had just faced. Kelrath's claws tapped against the armrest of his throne, his mind running through every possibility, every angle, every possible explanation for the Nemesis. The ship wasn't just advanced, it was a force beyond conventional warfare. Survivor count? His voice was low, controlled. Vescaris hesitated. Of the original fleet, less than 40% remain. Some ships lost power mid-jump. We haven't re-established full communications yet, but... He trailed off, unable to bring himself to say the obvious. They had been obliterated. A transmission flickered onto the central holo display. A grainy feed of an admiral from another surviving dreadnought appeared, his bloodied mandibles twitching with rage and disbelief. Warlord, the Council must hear of this. His voice was hoarse, broken. The humans, they are not what we believed. Kelrath exhaled slowly. That was the truth none of them wanted to say out loud. For years, the Dominion had categorized humanity as an anomaly. A species that had risen too quickly, expanded too aggressively. They had expected resistance, yes. But what they had encountered today was not resistance. It was a revelation. The humans had let the Dominion believe in their own superiority. They had allowed the Empire to gather its forces, given them the illusion that their overwhelming numbers would sweep aside Earth's defenders. And then, at the very moment the Dominion believed victory was inevitable, they had revealed their true hand. It wasn't just the Nemesis. That monstrosity was merely the executioner. The real battle had been fought in the minds of the Dominion's greatest strategists, and they had lost before the first shot was even fired. Kelrath could see it now. The way the Black Lances had systematically shredded their escape routes. The way the Nemesis had struck with such surgical precision that the Dominion fleet collapsed in on itself. The way human forces had anticipated their reactions with such terrifying accuracy that even a warlord as seasoned as him had been reduced to an animal fleeing a predator. They knew, he muttered under his breath. Vescaris turned to him. What? They knew, Kelrath repeated, more certain now. His claws clenched the armrest. The humans knew exactly how we would respond. They knew we would gather our greatest fleet. They knew we would rely on sheer numbers. They knew we would assume their defenses were still based on conventional warfare. He turned his gaze toward the holographic projection of the shattered fleet. And they prepared for it. Vescaris said nothing, but the unspoken horror in his expression said enough. The Dominion had never fought an enemy like this before. Empires rose and fell on predictability, on knowing the strengths and weaknesses of one's foes. But what the humans had just demonstrated was something beyond simple technological advantage. It was adaptability. That was the real threat. It wasn't the Nemesis, nor the Black Lances, nor their anomalous weaponry. It was the fact that humanity had played the Dominion like a grand strategy game, and they had never even realized they were losing. Another transmission came through, this one encoded in Dominion high command frequencies. A cold sensation crept down Kelrath's spine. "Play it," he ordered. The display flickered. A human stood there. Not a general. Not a warlord. Just a man. In a dark uniform, seated at a desk, his fingers interlaced. No rank. No medals. No unnecessary displays of power. Yet his gaze carried an absolute certainty that made Kelrath's throat tighten. "I imagine by now, you understand the truth," the man said, his voice eerily calm. "You believed this war would end in domination. You believed overwhelming numbers would grant you victory." The man leaned forward slightly. "That was your first mistake." Kelrath gritted his teeth. The man continued. "We knew this was coming. We knew you would bring your armada, and we knew you would expect humanity to fight like every other species you've crushed. But we are not like the others." Kelrath could hear his own pulse pounding in his ears. "We are not here to be conquered." The man's voice darkened. "And we are not here to beg for peace." The holofeed zoomed out slightly, revealing what lay behind the man's desk. Kelrath's blood turned to ice, a map of the galaxy, and every Dominion world was marked in red. The human spoke his final words. "This war has only just begun." The transmission cut to black. Silence hung over the command deck. Kelrath's claws twitched. For the first time in his life, he realized what true fear felt like. This wasn't just a defeat. This was a warning, and humanity had just told the Dominion that they were next.